Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Crypt Finder. My name is Brian, and sometime back I did a video all about 7 underappreciated, undervalued vampire movies that I thought that you should check out. And that video received just tons of wonderful comments and suggestions. And so I decided, okay, let's do a follow-up. Part 2. So I have a few more sort of undervalued, maybe just underwatched vampire movies that I do think that people should definitely check out. As I mentioned in the first video, vampires, absolutely my favorite subgenre of horror. No doubt about it. It's never a chore for me to sit down and watch a good or bad vampire movie. I think all movies would probably be better if you could toss in a vampire. But anyway, that's just me. Back in around 2007 or so, I read this book, For the Dead Travel Fast. It's by Eric Newsom, and he was just a writer who decided he wanted to tackle like the fascination with vampires, and he was going to watch every vampire movie ever made. He didn't make it through that by the end of the book, but he kept asking fans when he would run into them, like, well, when do I get to the really good ones? Ouch. So I think, if you approach it like homework, probably going to fall flat on your face. If somebody told me right now I had to go and watch every Western ever made, I would say, no, thank you. I like the genre, but no, I don't want to watch every film ever made. And I think the difference is, and if you're here watching this right now, you're probably a fan of horror movies and vampire movies. And so for you watching some of these that I'm going to suggest, okay, it's all going to be born out of love and devotion, and that's going to make all the difference whatsoever. So I'll suggest these. Many of you will go and actually watch these, and you will appreciate them in a very different way than maybe like the casual viewer would. So anyway, in no particular order whatsoever, I have 10 more underrated, undervalued vampire movies that I think you should check out. Coming in at number 10 is Shadow of the Vampire from 2000. Now, I happen to be recording this in March, so I don't know when you'll see it, but the Blu-ray for Robert Eggers' wonderful film Nosferatu just came out last month, and so I thought, yeah, we might as well discuss this particular movie, this chilling sort of reimagining of the making of F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu in 1922. This movie is definitely going to blend historical fiction with some horror elements. This film follows the obsessive director Murnau, who's played by John Malkovich, as he tries to create a very authentic vampire film. And to achieve that, he ends up hiring a very mysterious actor named Max Schreck, who's played by Willem Dafoe, to play Count Orlok. As the production progresses, the crew begins to suspect that Shrek might not be acting at all. Yeah, he might actually be a real vampire. And with his cast and crew in growing peril, Murnau must decide how far he's willing to go for cinematic perfection. Blurring the line between art and monstrosity, Shadow of the Vampire is a haunting sort of meditation on obsession and sacrifice and the dark side of creativity. Willem Dafoe's portrayal here is what really helps cement this film into sometimes comedic but also very darkly entertaining territory. If you are a fan of the original 1922 film Nosferatu or any of the remakes whatsoever, then I think you might actually enjoy this one because it is a fictional behind-the-scenes look, along with, of course, the inspired addition of a real vampire to the movie set. It makes for a pretty compelling watch. It's beautifully filmed, and it's also an homage to silent filmmaking, really as much as it is a vampire movie. Coming in at number 9 is The Black Room from 1982. This is a horror thriller that delves into themes of deception and seduction and murder. I don't want to categorize this as sleazy. Let's just say it's more of a sort of uncomfortable blend of psychological horror, but they definitely double down on the erotic thriller side of it. The story follows adult siblings Jason and Bridget, played here by Stephen Knight and Cassandra Gava, and they pose as a very affluent couple using newspaper ads to rent out a secluded black-walled room in their mansion to unsuspecting tenants. This is meant to be a hidden pleasure palace, right? Where everything is available just for the right price. So you have people renting this room for all sorts of sexual activities, and they aren't looking for any sort of paper trail or accountability. So it's all hidden under the table. However, Jason and Bridget's true intentions are a lot more sinister. Jason is afflicted with a very rare disease that forces him to regularly consume human blood, and Bridget helps him lure victims into their deadly trap. Meanwhile, we have an unsuspecting married couple, Larry and Robin, and they find themselves sort of caught up in this seductive web. Larry is a womanizer who becomes entangled in an affair with Bridget while also picking up and bringing women to this room, unaware that he's really being manipulated into becoming a victim himself. Robin begins to sense, something's wrong. The character dynamics in this film, they're odd. Larry wants the thrill of sexual adventures, and his wife is more than willing to play along, but he doesn't want to imagine his wife in that same way, and she thinks his discussion of the black room and the women that he brings there, she considers this nothing more than like just sort of fantasy role play in his head. So she is totally shocked to find out, no, it's all real. The movie is a mix of sort of psychological horror, eroticism, and a kind of low-budget grindhouse feel to it, and that might appeal to some people, it might not. You're probably, just in the way that I'm describing it, you're probably going to know if this is a movie for you or not. There is an experimental vibe that you get from this film. You're not really sure how far the filmmakers are going to go, although in the end they don't really go quite as far as you'd like. But still, it's one of those films slotted at the end of the 70s with the swinger scene and the beginning of the 80s where things like voyeurism and adultery are now in vogue. And this movie was made in 1981, so the early days of the AIDS crisis are not yet front and center, but you can't help but notice those lingering shots of all the hypodermic needles and the blood transfusions. The Black Room stands out as a unique entry in the early 80s horror wave. It delivers a blend of, I guess, seedy sex exploitation and suspense. You also have Christopher McDonald here. He has a very small role, one of his first films, as does also Lena Quigley, who would show up again in The Return of the Living Dead and Night of the Demons. Please don't go into this one thinking, wow, I'm going to love that. You might be sorely disappointed. There are no traditional vampires in this movie, but it's a very interesting take on the subgenre. And it's interesting somewhat lurid. It was made in 1981. I saw it in 1983. And for all of the film's problems, and it's got some problems here: acting, production values, weak camera angles, etc. But I've never really forgotten it. And there's a really nice version of this from Vinegar Syndrome. So you might want to check it out. Just fair warning, go in and know that, it's not a great movie, but it is a really interesting take on vampires. Coming in at number 8 from 1977, it is George Romero's take on vampirism. The movie is Martin. This is a psychological horror thriller that it sort of reimagines vampire mythology through a modern, more realistic lens. The film follows Martin. He's a troubled young man. He believes himself to be an 84-year-old vampire, though he lacks any kind of supernatural ability. Instead of traditional fangs, he drugs his victims and drinks their blood by slashing them open with a razor blade. Sent to live with his deeply religious cousin Kuda, who believes that Martin is very much the old school classic vampire of the old world variety, and so Martin really struggles with his identity quite a bit, craving both human connection and the thrill of these violent kills. Blurring the lines between delusion and reality, Martin is a really haunting, intimate character study. It subverts all the vampire tropes while also exploring loneliness and trauma and repression. I don't want to say that every film that features a young person exploring if they are a vampire versus mental illness owes a huge nod to Martin, but It's really hard not to see the similarities between Martin and some other films, such as Midnight Sun from 2011. Also, Vampire, starring Kevin Zegers from 2011 as well. The Transfiguration from 2016. And even the movie My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To from 2020. Remember, Martin came out in 1977. Hammer Studios had given up the ghost with their vampire series in 1974 with Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. And while, yeah, that's a martial arts horror film from, set in Japan, it still had plenty of gothic tropes. By 1979, you had George Hamilton. He's spoofing Bela Lugosi in Love at First Bite. You had Klaus Kinski and Werner Herzog's remake of Nosferatu. And you had Frank Langella in Universal's big screen adaptation of the Broadway play of Dracula. All of those other movies are either played for laughs or thrills, but Martin is a wholly unique approach to vampirism. And the movie does a good job of sort of driving that home, whether it's Martin biting into a clove of garlic to prove that, yeah, it's all just superstition. None of it is real, not what Kuda believes it is. And also, he falls into a very casual relationship with a woman who at one point says, I wish that I could be just like you. And he says, no, it's not like in the movies. It's not catching. So, very interesting modern movie, at least for the time, approach to vampirism, and has a very gothic score that somehow works against the crumbling decay of Pittsburgh in the mid 1970s. Only David Cronenberg's Rabid, released the exact same year, stands as sort of a fresh take on vampires. But I personally, I prefer Martin. I really enjoy the ambiguous nature of Martin's condition, the black and white moments where you're uncertain if they are memories from long ago or just stylized fantasies, the amount of pity and revulsion you feel for Martin. It's all really intriguing. It's a slow movie. I mean, not a lot happens. There is a 150-minute version of this film that's sold to a private collector. If it was ever made available, of course I would watch it. And the ending of this movie, I won't spoil it for anyone, but it took me totally by surprise. It shouldn't have, because the film does follow a certain trajectory, and yet I was so caught up in the story that I really didn't see it coming. Years ago, I read the novelization of the film, hoping it might flesh out maybe a little bit more, but it stayed very true to the movie. So I think this is one where you just dive in and then you kind of let it simmer in your brain afterward until you can really decide how to process it. Just an odd fact here. While they were filming Creepshow in 1982, they needed someone really thin enough to play the corpse in the first segment called Father's Day, and that was John Amplas, the star of Martin. Every time I watch Creepshow and Nathan Grantham's decaying corpse rises up to take his vengeance and he's groaning, I want my cake, I always just have to smile, and I think that's Martin. Coming in at number 7 is Fright Night Part 2 from 1988. Now, I think that most people would probably know Tom Holland's film Fright Night from 1985. Just in case you don't, I'm going to give you a very brief recap for reasons that'll become obvious in just a second. So, Tom Holland's film is sort of a hip, cool comedy horror film. It follows Charlie Brewster. He's a teenager, an avid fan of horror films, and he discovers that his new neighbor Jerry Dandridge is a vampire responsible for a series of recent murders in the area. When Charlie's attempts to expose Dandridge ultimately fails and his life is threatened, he reaches out to horror movie host Peter Vincent, who's played by Roddy McDowall, to help him. Vincent is kind of this washed-up actor, horror movie host. He's known for playing a vampire hunter in very B or C grade movies. And despite all the initial skepticism, Peter ends up joining Charlie and battling Jerry to save Charlie's girlfriend Amy and stop the vampire's reign of terror. So this movie came out at a time in 1985. It was kind of a wasteland for vampire movies. Outside of a couple exceptions, there weren't that many. And the movie pokes fun at that too. Peter Vincent even says nobody cares about vampire movies anymore or vampire hunters. And he even says for Charlie's generation, All you care about is watching demented madmen running around in ski masks, hacking up young virgins. So, really nice nod to the slasher films of the 80s there. But this movie, it really has it all. It's got some comedy, of course. It does have horror elements as well. It's got a lot of suspense. And it also has those classic vampire tropes. This has become a bit of a cult favorite for the wonderful acting of Chris Sarandon as the menacing Jerry Dandridge. You have Roddy McDowall, as I mentioned before, as our reluctant hero Peter Vincent. Then you also have William Ragsdale, Amanda Bearse, and Stephen Jeffries. This movie, of course, was remade in 2011 with Anton Yelchin and Colin Farrell. All the campy humor is thrown out the window for a much more straightforward reworking on Hitchcock's Rear Window meets maybe 2007's Disturbia with Shia LaBeouf, and then vampires tossed in as well. It's very entertaining, but it also lacks the charm of the original and all those practical effects that made Tom Holland's film so much fun. This then ultimately led to a sequel of the 2011 remake, which was called Fright Night Part 2 New Blood, but it's basically the same story. All they really did is end up changing the location, and they've also turned Jerry Dandridge, has been recast as a female, and she's also Elizabeth Bathory, the famous Hungarian countess who bathed in the blood of young girls. So everybody get all that, right? There was a movie and then a remake and then a remake of the remake, but sometimes I think that people actually forget that there was a direct sequel to Tom Holland's original film, Fright Night in 1985, and it was called Fright Night Part 2 from 1988. It's often overlooked and forgotten, but hey, in my book, it's almost as much fun as the original 85 classic, and that's the one that we're going to take a look at. This film is directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, and it picks up a few years after the events of the original Fright Night. Charlie Brewster is now in college, and he's been undergoing massive therapy, so much so he's convinced himself that everything that he saw that involved vampires, it was all just a delusion. However, his fragile sense of normalcy is shattered when a seductive, mysterious woman named Regine moves into town. Regine is ultimately revealed to be the sister of Jerry Dandridge, the vampire Charlie defeated in the first film, and yeah, she wants revenge. Along with her band of somewhat ill-defined supernatural minions, she begins to torment Charlie and his new girlfriend Alex, and Charlie ultimately has to enlist the help of Peter Vincent all over again. The film combines horror and dark humor, continuing the themes of the original while introducing a new villain and also expanding on the story's supernatural lore. Julie Carmen steps into the role of Regine. She may not be quite as charismatic, maybe, as Chris Sarandon in the original Fright Night, but she's very good. And also, just as an actor, she has a really great way of using her voice to just fantastic effect. You've got the same composer as the original, Brad Fiedel. You have William Ragsdale and Roddy McDowall back around this time as well. This movie kind of languished with issues because the budget was slashed, and Tom Holland and Chris Sarandon were both off making Child's Play at the time. So some of the other actors had moved on to other film and TV roles, such as Amanda Bearse. She was under contract with Married with Children. But the film ended up being only a very limited release. It really hurt the chances of any future sequels. Tom Holland actually wanted to direct a third Fright Night film, and Roddy McDowall was completely on board as well. And so they had set up a meeting with Carolco chairman Jose Menendez. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because, yes, Eric and Lyle Menendez actually murdered their parents before that meeting could ever take place, which ultimately kind of meant that any future sequels for Fright Night were doomed. This ultimately led to the weak distribution results of Fright Night Part 2, and all of that is just background info for the fact the film never got a lot of attention, and it's a fun, engaging movie. You've got great practical effects, you've got a gaggle of supernatural creatures that, while never clearly defined, what they are or their range of abilities or weaknesses, they are so funky and cool, and it really just doesn't matter. You've got a hip vampire on roller skates, a werewolf that can be destroyed with a wooden stake, interesting, a bug-eating Renfield-like bodyguard. It's all just a mismatch of tropes, but the movie is good, and it deserves to be seen. A small aside here, Julie Carmen went on to be in Robert Redford's The Milagro Beanfield War and John Carpenter's film In the Mouth of Madness, but she was a very good vampire, and she ended up doing an episode of Diagnosis Murder with Dick Van Dyke in 1995, where she played a vampire. Does anyone else remember that, or was I the only one who watched it? At number 6 from 2004 is the movie Eternal. This is a Canadian horror film that is very much, again, inspired by Elizabeth Bathory, who was also known as the Blood Countess. The film follows Raymond Pope. He's played by Conrad Pia. He's a Montreal detective, and he's investigating the disappearance of his own wife, who vanished after visiting a very mysterious and seductive woman named Elizabeth Kane. Elizabeth, along with her assistant Irina, lead a secretive, opulent lifestyle. It certainly hints at her being a vampire. As Raymond digs deeper, he begins to uncover a rather sinister conspiracy here that's all about blood rituals and about a quest for immortality, and also a lot of dark secrets connected to Elizabeth Kane and her past, which certainly details centuries worth of her obsession for youth and beauty. It's a really interesting movie. It's very stylish and sort of slick, but it's also more inclined to be, I guess, softcore hedonism. It blends gothic horror with a lot of psychological tension, creating a sort of dark, suspenseful narrative about desire and immortality and the lengths people will go to just to preserve their power. Caroline Neron plays Elizabeth, and she does a wonderful job of being alluring and seductive and also kind of casual about the amount of death and destruction she causes. This movie won't knock your socks off, but it has an ending that never really left me. I won't go into any spoilers here. For a lot of people, this is going to seem kind of underwhelming as far as an ending, but for me, it also seemed very realistic. The grand showdown they set up doesn't actually happen, and by the time you reach a quiet, understated ending, you're left really wondering what comes next after the movie ends. There are questions you're left with, and maybe it was a setup for a sequel, and maybe it was just that the filmmakers wanted you to stop and think about love and desire and what you would do to achieve that forever. I think the movie gets lumped into a sex romp sort of category with some masochistic scenes, and so it's largely overlooked or ignored, but it's a really engaging film. And one thing this movie does really well is make you think you're watching sort of traditional vampires with fangs that attack people, only to really discover that Elizabeth's assistant, Irina, she's played by Victoria Sanchez, she might just be sort of a wannabe poser, or maybe not, but very interesting that she just has a set of fake fangs that she made just to help her play the part a little bit more. So again, a lot of questions get asked, not a whole lot of answers. It's all those little touches here that kind of keep you guessing throughout that makes this one worth a watch. Number 5 is The Vampire Lovers from 1970. This was directed by Roy Ward Baker, and it came from the legendary Hammer Studios. In my other video about underrated vampire movies, I featured Vampire Circus, and that one also came from Hammer. And during the late 60s, early 1970s, Hammer was really starting to branch out. They were looking for fresh and innovative ideas and interesting takes on vampirism. Christopher Lee, who had played Dracula in quite a few of their films, it was just getting harder and harder to convince him to don the cape and fangs to keep coming back for more. And so instead, Hammer decided to take a look back at some classic literature for inspiration. The movie is the first in the Karnstein trilogy, based on Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's 1872 novella Carmilla. The story takes place in early 19th century Styria and follows the mysterious and seductive Countess Mircalla Karnstein. She hides her true identity through different aliases throughout the film, like Marcella and Carmilla at various times, but she's a vampire who infiltrates aristocratic families to prey on young women. Posing as a guest, she befriends and ultimately feeds on her host daughters, leaving a trail of death in her wake. The central character, Laura, becomes one of her victims, leading to a climactic effort by General von Spieldorf and Baron Herzog to destroy Mirkarla Karnstein and her vampire lineage. This film is notable for its atmospheric visual themes of forbidden desire, its depiction of lesbianism, which was pretty daring for the time. The movie features a lot of blood and nudity, but Ingrid Pitt delivers a very memorable performance as the alluring yet deadly Carmilla. You have Peter Cushing showing up here in a very small role, and you also have Ferdy Mayne, who plays the town doctor. Now, why would I mention him, right? Well, it turns out just a few years before, in 1967, he was the undead menace. He was actually Count von Krolak in Roman Polanski's comedic send-up of Hammer Films. It was called The Fearless Vampire Killers. The Vampire Lovers blends a lot of gothic horror with sensuality, definitely marked its place as a cult classic. There are two other sequels. You have Lust for a Vampire and Twins of Evil, each one going through a process of diminishing returns. They're not as strong or compelling as The Vampire Lovers. They're not bad, they're just more by the book as far as formula, but they're weakened by the lack of Ingrid Pitt, which certainly would have helped. But also there seems to be a decision to steer away from some of the horror and lean more into sex exploitation. If you happen to be a fan of Lefano's original novella, then I think you probably would have to say this is the most faithful adaptation they have. Other filmmakers have tried tackling this same subject. You certainly find that with Roger Vadom's Blood and Roses from 1960, Crypt of the Vampire from 1964, The Blood-Splattered Bride from 1972, and Showtime also had a series called Nightmare Classics from producer Shelley Duvall, and one of the episodes was a retelling of Carmilla with Meg Tilly and Ione Skye. It's interesting, but only at 50 minutes long to accommodate the series format. Yeah, it's not, they can't play out as much as they would have liked to, and for some reason it's moved from rural Styria, Austria, to the deep south and set on a plantation in the middle of the 19th century. You also have The Moth Diaries from 2011, which is more of a dreamy gothic fairy tale, and one simply called Carmilla from 2019. I've seen them all. They're very interesting. They tend to be kind of slow burn for some reason. I mean, especially the latter film, Carmilla. They seem to kind of jettison the idea of a vampire altogether. It's a little bit baffling. I'm not sure why you would do that. But if you are going to remove the idea of a vampire or reimagine what a vampire is and that a vampire might just sort of consume your life instead of consuming blood, then okay, I think we have to mention another movie from 1992 that is Poison Ivy, starring Drew Barrymore and Sarah Gilbert. Yep, I hate to drag it into the conversation, and I have no clue if the filmmakers were using Carmilla as a reference point, but there are a lot of similarities, even down to the voiceover narration at the end of the film, which really drives home sort of the lifelong trauma and grief and longing that you see in Lefano's novella. Poison Ivy spawned a whole host of sequels. The sequels are not very good. They're almost like some of the Cinemax softcore exploitation type films that you would see in the 90s and into the early 2000s. But the original film is actually quite good. If you're a fan of Carmilla, but you haven't seen The Vampire Lovers or Poison Ivy, that might be kind of a nice double feature there. Please don't go into the comments and say Poison Ivy is not a vampire movie. I hear you, but as an adaptation of Carmilla without the vampirism, maybe. I don't know. Kind of depends on your definition of vampires. If you're willing to sort of expand that out just a little bit to something or someone that just kind of consumes your entire life, okay, maybe. Anyway, you all give it a watch and let me know what you think. I just feel like a lot of the same themes from Carmilla are definitely present in Poison Ivy. Speaking of Hammer Studios, coming in at number 4 is Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter from 1974. This is sort of from their breakout line of vampire films. It's directed by Brian Clemens and follows the exploits of Captain Kronos. He's a former soldier turned vampire hunter. He travels the countryside with his hunchbacked assistant, Professor Grost, and together they investigate a series of mysterious deaths in which the victims are drained of their youth rather than blood. This is where the film starts to shake things up just a little bit. It's countering your expectations of what a vampire is. And so Captain Kronos and Gross, they end up meeting up with a woman named Carla, a local woman, and they uncover a sinister family with ties to a unique breed of vampires. The film features swashbuckling action, gothic horror, a little touch of humor in there. It sort of definitely sets it apart from some traditional tales. The inventive approach to the vampire mythos and the very compelling lead performance by Horst Janssen have made it sort of a favorite among Hammer horror enthusiasts. You also have Caroline Munro co-starring here, so she had already been the first victim, Laura Bellows, of a recently resurrected Dracula in the film Dracula AD 1972, and she would go on to become a Bond girl in 1977 with The Spy Who Loved Me. She was also the target of the deranged killer in Maniac from 1980, and she was also the actress stalked by a crazed fan in 1982's The Last Horror Film. At number 3 is Blood Red Sky from 2021. This was a Netflix horror thriller directed by Peter Thorwarth. The film follows Nadia, who is played by Perry Baumeister. She's a woman afflicted with a mysterious blood disorder who boards a transatlantic flight with her son Elias, seeking medical treatment in the United States. Mid-flight, a group of terrorists led by Berg, who's played by Dominic Purcell, hijacks the plane, and to protect her son, Nadia is forced to reveal her dark secret that she is indeed a vampire. As the hijackers threaten the passengers, Nadia unleashes her supernatural abilities to combat the terrorists and try to safeguard Elias. This is a bit of an interesting departure here. You have a vicious vampire who also is a very loving and protective mother. This is a really well done film. It's riveting. It keeps you glued to the action on screen. Dominic Purcell, who played the modern day incarnation of Dracula, or Drake as they called him in Blade 3, here he is. He's in another vampire movie, just I guess for the fun of it. He's better in this film than the downward trajectory of the Blade saga, and that third film definitely, it was the weakest of the three. You should probably stay away from that one. But Blood Red Sky received generally positive reviews with critics. They were praised its sort of unique blend of horror and action, delivering a really fast-paced treat. If you have not seen this movie, I highly recommend it. At number 2, there's a Spanish-language fantasy drama called All the Moons from 2020. It's directed by Igor Legarreta, and it's set in the late 19th century, and the film offers a very hauntingly beautiful tale about immortality and loss and human connection. It blends the gothic horror with some pretty poignant emotional depth. The story begins in 1876 during the Third Carlist War as a brutal conflict rages across the Basque countryside. Amidst the destruction, you have an orphan girl who's played here by Hazia Carneros. She's gravely injured in a bombing that destroys the orphanage where she lives, and on the brink of death, she is saved by a mysterious woman who reveals herself to be a vampire. The woman offers the girl eternal life, which she accepts, which allows her to heal and escape death. And the woman becomes kind of a surrogate mother figure in a lot of ways. She teaches her how to embrace her immortality and also how to survive by feeding on blood. The girl, who really never had a family, she bonds with her rescuer and believes she has finally found a place where she belongs. However, their idyllic existence is pretty short-lived. When the woman is seemingly destroyed by a group of vampire hunters, this girl is left utterly alone, wandering the world as an immortal child. Years later, the girl encounters Candido. He's a solitary farmer mourning the death of his own daughter, and over time they form a sort of father-daughter bond that helps her reconnect to some of her waning humanity. However, her vampiric nature poses a constant threat to their relationship. Struggling with her thirst for blood and the fear of potentially losing this new father figure that she's had, All the Moons ends up being kind of a quiet, reflective movie in a lot of ways. It's not a conventional vampire film. It uses vampirism more as a metaphor for grief and isolation. The film is richly atmospheric with moody landscapes, very muted color palette. The performances are subtle but really compelling. And it brings sort of a haunting vulnerability to it. The ending is a little bit weaker. I can't go into it because I don't want to, delve into the spoilers, but it's one that I think was first used in The Lost Boys in 1985. Just think more of kind of a fairy tale resolution. In other words, you come through the woods, you're a little wiser for the wear, but everything turns out all right. It's that sort of thing, which sort of cheapens everything else that comes before it, but don't let that deter you in any way whatsoever. Just go into it more thinking about the fact that at least the first 2/3 of the film, wonderful meditation on learning to value fleeting moments of connection over eternal existence. Beautifully crafted tale. It's slow, it's really soft on the supernatural elements, but if you want a thoughtful look at sort of the loneliness of eternal life, you can think of some of the existential dread of Only Lovers Left Alive or Interview with the Vampire. Then this sort of fresh take on vampirism might be really interesting for you. At number one from 1983, it is the movie The Hunger. One of my viewers mentioned I didn't have this one on the list of 7 underrated vampire films that I did before, and I thought, well, I would have never put this on a list of underrated vampire movies because I've always held it in pretty high regard, but it did dawn on me. We're 42 years out from the release date of this film, so 2 generations removed. And yeah, it could certainly have fallen off of everybody's radar. So anything I can do to sort of turn that spotlight on a movie that absolutely deserves it, I will do it. And this is one of them. Just for the occasion, I went ahead and put on my Ankh necklace, just in case. And so, yeah, let's talk about this particular film. I might wax philosophically here just a little bit because critics have often complained that this movie is all style and no substance, and I think they are completely wrong. So I do want to talk about the movie and go in a little bit more depth than I did on some of the other films on this list. Yeah, and I want to talk about why I think it's almost a masterpiece. A lot of people are not going to remember the Twilight Zone magazine. It sadly only ran for a very brief time, but this one was the one that I picked up, and it had a fantastic article about the hunger. This is back from 83, April of 83. Fantastic article. And after reading this, the thing that really kind of drew me in was the filmmakers kept saying they wanted glamour to it. They wanted basically the equivalent of Grace Kelly and Leslie Howard, and they got them in David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve. This movie introduces us to Miriam and John Blaylock. They're rich, they're beautiful, and they're thirsting for human blood. Miriam is an ancient race of vampires who maintains eternal life by feeding on others. Her current companion is John, who's played by David Bowie, who, despite appearing youthful, he begins to rapidly age for unknown reasons. It's actually here that if you happen to have read the book by Whitley Strieber, kind of helps a little bit. Miriam begins to question if something's going on with the stock of humans, if evolution has taken a downturn because her lovers used to last about 300 or 400 years. Now, not so much. I think John in the book is about 180 years old or so. As John faces this horrifying reality, he seeks help from a researcher named Dr. Sarah Roberts, who's played by Susan Sarandon, but Miriam sets her sights on Sarah as a potential new love interest now that John's degenerative process has started. The film takes some dramatic turns, blending elements of horror and romance and psychological thriller as Sarah begins to just sink deeper and deeper into Miriam's clutches. The surface is deceptively simple here. Vampires prowling the nightclubs of Manhattan, trolling for victims, while appearing as wealthy socialites, giving music lessons. But the hunger explores the loneliness and isolation that comes with immortality. This is mirrored a little bit in Jim Jarmusch's film Only Lovers Left Alive, and the previous entry I discussed as well, All the Moons. But in the hunger, there's no sense of warmth or longing. John and Miriam live in a house that looks more like a museum than a home, and there is a cold, alien quality to their routine. The first words that you hear in the movie that aren't being distorted over the music is the word forever, and the last line of the film is take your time. So it is clearly invested in the passing of years and how Miriam is sort of trapped in an existence where she outlives all of her companions, watching them waste away while she remains unchanged. But their fate isn't just to wither and die. Miriam's promise of immortality was true. When she told them that it was forever, it really was, but it just comes at a terrible price. This is poignantly illustrated through John's rapid aging, highlighting the horror of eternal life with an infinitely deteriorating body and no chance of escape. One element to the novel is that the hunger, that thirst for blood continues, so they are forever rotting away and starving at the same time. And no matter how much they feed, it can't quench the thirst. That's something that's not as clear in the film as much as it is in the novel, but Miriam's promise to care for all of her lovers means that when they are too decrepit to continue functioning, she seals them away in boxes in the attic, and that's exactly what she does with John. And once he is tucked neatly out of the way, she sets her sights on Sarah and begins to manipulate her both emotionally and physically, which clearly serves as a metaphor for addiction and dependency. This film really explores the transformative nature of vampirism. Susan Sarandon does a wonderful job of treating this blood-borne virus in her system like drug addiction, to the point where she's actually twitching and rocking on the floor. And she also, when she feeds, the calm, sort of euphoric expression on her face, yeah, that's hard to miss. But the movie also taps into Sarah's psychological journey. She goes from skeptic to believer, and that mirrors her transformation from scientist to participant. There is a loss of identity as she becomes more and more seduced into Miriam's world. Cinematographer Stephen Goldblatt uses a lot of moody lighting, bold colors, meticulous framing. Every shot feels like a carefully composed work of art. This was actually heralded as a flaw, believe it or not, when the film was released. Too many critics noted that director Tony Scott's commercial background and that the film, it looked like a blood-soaked Chanel ad, basically. Scott was supposedly overheard at a party during the pre-production phase where he said, "The Hunger is not a horror movie, it is an art film." I don't know if that's true, if he really said that or not, because frankly, the quick cuts within the first 10 minutes were pretty jarring at the time. No one was intercutting urban discotheques, slitting the throats of partygoers, rhesus monkeys attacking each other, and all this back to the music of Bauhaus. That's a lot of frenetic energy. It's been done in subsequent years, of course, and other movies, so it might seem more normalized now, but for the time, it was really fresh. As a viewer, frankly, you're forced to engage. I mean, why are these people in a nightclub? Why are you seeing a monkey attacking and killing its mate? You come to realize that, yes, that the monkeys are all being used in Sarah's research on aging, but you don't know that initially. You have to stay focused with the movie and connect all those dots yourself. The film's soundtrack has a lot of pulsing rhythms, but also you've got the other end of the spectrum. You have haunting compositions by Schubert, Bach, and Ravel. These pieces all underscore what happens on screen. In the first act of the film, John is unable to sleep and sort of prowls restlessly through the bedroom to the strings of Bach's Suite No. 1 for cello in G, while flashing on chamber halls from 200 years ago. It's very evocative. One of my favorite moments is John sitting in the music room when Miriam comes home. He's already into a very advanced stage of aging. The rain is streaking the French doors, and he reiterates the promises that she made to him and asks if she still remembers, and she responds, "Every day." And this is all backed by Schubert's Sad Sonata in B-flat major. In 1983, when the AIDS epidemic was raging and healthy people became husk of themselves in a shorter time than you would imagine, it's both really haunting and tragic. Yep, the movie falls apart at the end. Tony Scott said that as the filming went on, they tended to gloss over the plot points. Personally, I don't really find this much of a flaw in the early part of the film. The fact that the movie makes you work to understand what's happening, I find that just really compelling. For example, the dialogue, although sparse, is still very revealing. John seems aware that Miriam keeps her previous companions in the attic. That's true in the book and in the film, so you're kind of left wondering, is he so enraptured by Miriam that he doesn't really care? Or does he think that so much time has passed, he's been lulled into thinking he will never change? Or does he have a keen sense of what will happen, but he just chooses to avoid facing it? Over the years, the film has found a bit of a cult following, which is nice. If you've read the book from 1981, you know that Miriam has a very rich history spanning thousands of years that the book actually goes into a lot more depth with her life and her some of her lovers that she's had. And you also get to know John a little bit better as well. You get inside his thoughts, which makes it even more horrifying as his body begins to break down and betray him. The film sort of flirts with this a little bit, but only in subtle flashbacks. One thing that the movie retains, one key element that you also see in the book, the word vampire is never even mentioned. In discussing this film, I can also offer you another underrated vampire movie, a sort of a double feature if you want to. It's Harry Kumel's Daughters of Darkness from 1971. I've never read it confirmed anywhere, but to me, it's obvious the cinematic style of The Hunger was influenced by Kumel's film. John and Miriam's gothic brownstone compared to the spacious Belgian hotel in Daughters of Darkness. Yep, it's there. One scene even has Miriam's hairstyle as a direct copy of Delphi Seyring's 20s style wave from Daughters of Darkness, so I see some comparisons there. Now, granted, The Hunger begins to break down in the last 15 minutes. There is a studio forced ending in case a sequel had been possible, and frankly, it just ruins so much of what came before it. And that's why I said it was almost a masterpiece. However, it still acts as a great dreamscape where eternal life and blood are all glossy possibilities, where you can live forever, but always as an addict. And frankly, who wouldn't want all those wonderful shears billowing in the wind?
I think there was actually more wind back then.
Well, that's going to do it, everybody. That's it for 10 underrated vampire movies, or maybe just underwatched vampire movies that I think you should go and check out. Please hit the like and subscribe button. And as always, everyone, stay curious and stay scared.
Are you thirsty, Charlie? Come kiss me.